There was a time when Top Gear wasn't just a car show, it was the car show. It was a global sensation and a cultural powerhouse, and arguably the biggest British television show in history. But despite its overwhelming success and incredible ratings, the show came crashing down in sensational fashion. Though before we begin, let's address the obvious. Top Gear in its original form has been long gone for a good while. The BBC tried to keep it alive with a bunch of different hosts. But let's be real, it was a lost cause. The chemistry between the trio that made the show so compelling to begin with was replaced by this corporate, factory-assembled lineup that felt more like a PR stunt than an authentic relationship. And unsurprisingly, the audience just weren't as into it. Eventually, after years of decline and a horrible accident that happened to host Freddie Flintoff, the show was put on an indefinite hiatus, a quiet end to what was once a television juggernaut. So this video in particular is going to focus on the original cast and what made the show to begin with, and the events that lead to their eventual demise. The show's formula was deceptively simple. There were car reviews, new segments, power laps, and of course, the cool wall. Because apparently, it was vital to know how cool or uncool a car was. Top Gear episodes featured pre-recorded short films showcasing car challenges and tests, with studio discussions linking these in between. But what really set Top Gear apart was the specials. These were essentially the Avenger movies of the Top Gear universe. Longer, more ambitious, and packed with some of the most memorable moments in the show's history. The trio would take on near impossible challenges in some of the most extreme places in the entire world, all while trying to one-up one another. The chemistry between Clarkson, Hammond, and May was the glue that held the entire show together. Their dynamic wasn't forced, it was authentic, and for many it was the main reason they even watched the show, me included. Jeremy was the loud, opinionated, witty leader. James was the quiet, nerdy and cheeky counterpart, while Hammond was the fun-loving adrenaline junkie. Their differences are what made for some of the best unscripted moments in television history. Even when they were blowing up caravans, racing across the Arctic, or trying and failing to build an amphibious car, there was always a sense that this trio were having the times of their lives, and that energy was contagious. But as the seasons rolled on, cracks began to appear. The trio's antics became more predictable, and the edginess of their jokes became harder to ignore. Even behind the scenes, the show's executive producer, Andy Willman, admitted that the hosts were starting to play into their on-screen characters just a little too much. The criticism started to build, with a lot of people saying that Top Gear became less about the actual cars and more about staged comedy. And to be fair, they weren't entirely wrong. Clarkson had made it a habit to mock almost every single ethnic group in the entire world, and also touched upon issues that were a bit controversial, such as climate change. But let's be honest, this wasn't the real reason why the show got cancelled, because the BBC were not gonna cancel their cash cow for a few edgy and sarcastic comments. Instead, it would be a number of controversies that would lead the show to go up in flames, both literally and figuratively. The first of which came in 2014. This was the now infamous Clarkson eeny meeny miny mo slip up during a car review, in which he accidentally left in a version that sounded suspiciously like the N-word.
A couple of years ago, I recorded an item for Top Gear in which I quoted the rhyme eeny meeny miny mo. Now, when I viewed this footage several weeks later, I realised that in one of the mumbled versions, if you listen very carefully with the sound turned right up, it did appear that I'd actually used the word I was trying to obscure. I was mortified by this, horrified. It is a word I loathe. Please be assured I did everything in my power to not use that word.
The second incident came in the form of an involuntary racial slur and controversial comment about East Asians, whereby Jeremy Clarkson made an inappropriate comment about an Asian man crossing a bridge, referring to the individual as having a slope on it. With 2 strikes already confirmed for Clarkson, the final nail in the coffin came during the Argentina special. Clarkson and the team took a typical trip to Argentina, but in typical Top Gear fashion, they pushed the limits just a little too far. The incident I'm referring to is that one of the cars they were driving had a license plate that read H9A2FKL, which the Argentinians quickly interpreted as a reference to the Falklands War. For those unaware, the Falklands War was a conflict between the UK and Argentina in the 1980s, and the license plate was seen as a direct and disrespectful dig at Argentina. As expected, the Argentinians were not pleased and chased the crew out of the country, eventually forcing them to flee to Chile. The scandal escalated further when spare number plates were found in the abandoned cars, each one reading BE11END, a clear message that the license plate incident might have been intentional. The BBC tried to deny it, but the damage was already done. By March 2015, the BBC decided to suspend Top Gear and launch an internal investigation into Jeremy Clarkson, particularly following an alleged physical altercation between Clarkson and one of the producers, Oysin Tayman. And it all came down to this very moment. After a long day of filming, Clarkson wanted a steak. What he got instead was a cold meat platter, and it's safe to say that he wasn't very happy about it. So in true Jeremy Clarkson fashion, he reportedly punched producer Tayman during a heated argument over the lack of hot food. Within weeks of the investigation, Clarkson had now been fired from the show he built into a global empire. And this wasn't just a suspension or provisional leave. This was quite literally the end. With Clarkson gone, Richard Hammond and James May were not gonna continue on the show. So Top Gear, as people knew and loved it, was officially over. But here's where things took a surprising turn. Despite the public outcry and the headlines, Clarkson, May, and Hammond didn't really lose. In fact, they probably came out ahead. Within months of Clarkson's sacking, Amazon came knocking and offered the trio £160 million to produce the Grand Tour, a new motoring show. The trio's salary got significantly bumped, and it was clear that they had found a new, more lucrative outlet for their brand of chaos. In the end, the fallout of Top Gear was probably one of those blessing in disguise moments. The show was becoming a bit stale, and while it was a cultural gem, it had begun to lose its magic. The move to the Grand Tour meant that the trio weren't only getting paid a lot more money, but they had creative freedom. They could push the boundaries again and do what they're best at, while also leaving the drama behind. Ultimately, Top Gear was never about the cars. It was about the three guys that made the show so special. Clarkson, Hammond, and May brought a level of energy, wittiness, and authenticity that no one else has been able to replicate. And while their time on Top Gear came to a messy end, their legacy stood on. They may have taken a few punches, but they came out even more successful than before, proving that sometimes, even when things fall apart, it's hard not to look back with nostalgia. And at the end of the day, that's the very reason we all loved the show.